The music floated like warm honey through the grand ballroom of the Riverside Country Club soft jazz, making you think of old love and half-forgotten promises. I stood near one of the tall marble pillars, the train of my pale lavender gown brushing the polished floor, my smile carefully painted on. Everyone around me was glowing my son David in his crisp navy tuxedo and his new wife Jessica, the picture of southern charm in ivory silk. The chandeliers above caught the shimmer of her diamond earrings, scattering light like broken glass. They were dancing their first dance as husband and wife, and the crowd watched with misty eyes. Mothers whispered, fathers nodded, photographers snapped their pictures, moments meant to be immortal. But behind that marble pillar, hidden from the soft laughter and clinking glasses, I overheard words that froze the blood in my veins. "She's almost 70, Jessica murmured to her maid of honor, her voice sweet and venomous. "We'll give it 6 months, maybe a year. When she starts forgetting things, we'll call a doctor. Early dementia. It's easy to make people believe it. Then we'll get her declared unfit, and the beach house." My heart dropped. "Jessica," her friend whispered. That's a lot. Are you serious?" Jessica laughed, a light sound that could have been mistaken for joy. "Please, it's practically mercy. Evelyn's all alone in that big house. It'll be better for everyone if David and I take over. Besides, he deserves that property after everything she's put him through." I couldn't breathe. That house, the Monterey Beach house, wasn't just a piece of real estate. It was 30 years of memories. My late husband Robert and I bought it when we were barely 33. It was where David learned to swim, where he built sandcastles until his knees turned brown from sun and salt, where Robert had proposed again on our 20th anniversary to make me laugh. Every wall of that house held a heartbeat. And now this woman, this stranger, was plotting to steal it by painting me insane. I stepped back from the pillar, pressing my palm against my chest. The string lights above blurred as tears threatened to rise, but I forced them down. Evelyn Parker did not cry at weddings, especially not her son's. Jessica looked up then, catching sight of me. For a fraction of a second, her smile faltered. Then, like a well-trained actress, she waved sweetly across the room. I waved back. That's what mothers do. We smile. We wave. We pretend we don't hear our children's destruction being planned in crystal-lit corners. The bartender raised his brow when I approached. "Evening, ma'am. What can I get you?" "Double whiskey," I said, my voice steady. He hesitated. "Rough night." "You could say that." When he slid the glass toward me, the scent of oak and smoke rose. I took a sip, the burn crawling down my throat like fire and clarity. Across the room, Jessica threw her head back and laughed at something David whispered. How strange, I thought, to watch your child smile while your heart broke silently behind a drink. David came over a few minutes later, tie-loosened sweat on his forehead. "Mom, you okay? You look pale." "Just tired," I said. "It's been a long day." He smiled, soft, distracted. "Jessica wants to talk to you about Christmas traditions. She's big on family holidays." I managed a grin. "I'll bet she is." "Don't tease," he said, chuckling. "She really wants you involved." "I'm sure." He squeezed my shoulder, kissed my cheek, and returned to the dance floor. I watched him go, the man who used to bring me seashells from the shore and say, "For you, Mama, because they shine like you." That little boy had once believed I was unbreakable. Now I wasn't sure he knew who I was at all. I drifted through the party, smiling, nodding, pretending. The laughter around me felt like distant thunder, warm for everyone else, cold to me. Every compliment about Jessica, every toast to new beginnings pressed against my chest like a stone. She had everyone fooled. "She's such a blessing for David," one of my cousins said. "She brings out the best in him," another chimed in. I wanted to scream. But what good would it do? The world loves pretty faces with sweet voices. And I was just the aging widow, the groom's mother, a woman whose time was supposed to fade quietly into the background. I smiled until my jaw ached. When the music slowed, I slipped out onto the terrace. The night air was cool against my skin, carrying the faint scent of magnolia and river mist. Below, the water reflected the golden lights of the ballroom. I leaned against the railing, letting the wind loosen the mask I'd been wearing all evening. At 63, I had learned the art of silence. Silence when my husband died, and I had to raise a boy alone. Silence when clients underestimated me because I was a black woman in real estate. Silence when my son stopped calling every Sunday. But silence wasn't surrender. It was a strategy. And as I stared into the dark water, I promised myself that they would never see me coming. Later that night, after the last toast and the final song, I stood in front of the hotel mirror, removing my earrings. My reflection looked back, silver hair pulled into a bun, faint lines at the corners of my mouth, but eyes still sharp as ever. "Crazy," I whispered. "They'll say I'm crazy." I smiled at the woman in the mirror. Let them try. I picked up my phone and scrolled to the Thomas H., attorney contact. My thumb hovered, then pressed call. It rang once before his groggy voice answered. "Evelyn." "Everything okay, Thomas?" I said calmly. "I need you to start the paperwork tomorrow morning." "For what?" "For selling everything." There was a pause. "Everything." "Yes. The house on Maple Street and the beach house in Monterey." Quietly, quickly. "Evelyn, may I ask why?" "Let's say," I murmured, watching the city lights flicker outside the window, "my daughter-in-law has plans. And I have mine." That night, I sat by the window long after the city quieted, the moonlight spilling across the floor like spilled milk. I thought about Robert, how he used to rest his hand over mine when the world felt too heavy. I thought about David's laughter as a child echoing through the waves. I had sacrificed everything for that boy love sleep dreams, and now he was being led by someone who saw me not as a mother, but as a bank account waiting to expire. But Evelyn Parker had survived too much to die quietly. If they thought they were going to take my memories, my home, my dignity, they were about to learn what a lifetime of silence can teach a woman. Because when silence breaks, it cuts sharper than any scream. And mine was beginning. If you have ever been looked down upon, sacrificed for others to the point of forgetting yourself, remember, silence does not mean weakness. Please share this story, comment your feelings, and don't forget to like and subscribe to continue the journey of Evelyn, the woman who teaches the world that strength is not about screaming, but about how we stand firm when betrayed. 3 months before the wedding, the first time I met Jessica Monroe, she arrived at my front door carrying a bouquet of white lilies and a smile too bright for daylight. "Mrs. Parker." "I've been dying to meet you," she said, her tone sugary enough to rot teeth. I remember standing there, my hand still on the doorknob, thinking she looked like someone who rehearsed kindness in front of a mirror. "Please," I said, forcing a polite smile, "call me Evelyn." She laughed softly, stepping inside like she already belonged there. "Evelyn it is then. Wow, your home is stunning." It wasn't flattery that bothered me. It was the precision of it, the way her eyes darted across my living room as if cataloging every detail. The framed photos, the antique vases, the polished walnut furniture. David followed her, beaming like a teenager bringing home his first crush. "Mom, this is Jessica. Jessica, my mother, Evelyn Parker, the strongest woman I know." He said it with such pride, and yet his voice was almost desperate, as if he needed my approval before breathing. Jessica turned to me, hand extended. "David talks about you constantly. You raised an incredible man." I shook her hand. It was too soft, like someone who never did her own heavy lifting. "That's kind of you." We sat in the living room. I served coffee, and Jessica praised everything. The furniture, the scent of the candles, the art on the wall. It was the kind of praise that felt like she'd read a manual on how to impress the mother-in-law in 10 easy steps. Then, while David excused himself to take a phone call, Jessica leaned forward. "You've really built something special here, Evelyn. Not just a home, a life." The compliment was smooth, but her eyes were on the framed picture of Robert and me standing in front of our beach house. "That's the Monterey place?" she asked. My pulse slowed. "Yes. You know it." "Oh, David mentioned it. Said he grew up there every summer. It must be so sentimental for you." "It is." She smiled faintly. "You must miss your husband terribly." "I do." She tilted her head, voice gentle. "It must be hard managing everything alone now, especially at your age." The words hung in the air like poison perfume. I smiled politely, but inside something shifted. I've managed worse, I said. I didn't mean anything by it, she rushed to add. I admire women who stay independent later in life. So many people let things slip once they're widowed. My lips curved. Don't worry, dear. Nothing slips without my permission. She laughed, pretending not to notice the edge in my tone. When David returned, he looked at us as if expecting fireworks. So, what do you think? She's charming? I said. Jessica squeezed his hand. Your mom is amazing. I feel so lucky already. Lucky. That word rang strange in my ears. Within weeks, Jessica became a constant presence. She came over with wine to chat, stayed for dinner, reorganized my kitchen cabinets, and helped me balance my books. One afternoon, I returned from errands to find her rearranging my pantry. Oh, she said brightly, you keep the spices alphabetically. That's adorable. Adorable. I find it efficient, I said, setting down my bag. Well, efficiency is relative, she laughed. Keeping things by flavor groups actually stimulates brain recall. It's something I learned when I worked in social services. Helps elderly clients maintain mental clarity. Elderly. I was 63, not 93. But I said nothing. Just watched her move jars as if she owned them. Later that evening, she joined David and me for dinner. Halfway through the meal, she touched his arm and said, You know, babe, your mom must get lonely here by herself. We should visit more often. Or perhaps she should consider living closer to us. David looked at me like a boy caught between two teachers. I appreciate the concern, I said evenly, but I'm pretty content where I am. Jessica's smile didn't falter. Of course I think of you, Evelyn. Big houses can feel overwhelming. Her tone was sweet enough to hide the insult, but not from me. That night, I wrote a note in my journal. She wants control, not love. David told me he and Jessica were moving in a month later. Into the Maple Street property, he said casually, sipping his coffee. I looked up from the newspaper. My Maple Street property? Technically, yes. But you said it was just sitting there. It's an investment, David. I'm renting it out next quarter. He hesitated, then smiled like a guilty child. We'd pay rent, of course, just until we save up for our own place. Jessica's text came minutes later. Thank you for being so generous, Evelyn. It means the world to us. I hadn't agreed yet, but by the end of the week they had moved in. Jessica redecorated immediately. The old oak furniture I'd chosen for its warmth and history was replaced with sterile grays and whites. Curtains gone, family photos removed. When I dropped by to deliver a housewarming gift, she met me at the door, glowing. Evelyn. The house feels so us now, doesn't it? I looked around. It felt like a stranger's showroom. Very modern, I said. David came out of the kitchen, grinning. Jess has a great eye. She even found a buyer for your old coffee table. My old coffee table. She thought it didn't fit the new aesthetic. My chest tightened. That table had been Robert's. He'd built it with his hands during our first year of marriage. But I didn't say that, because what good would it do? Over time, small things began to vanish from my house too. A framed photo, a necklace, then one of my old checkbooks. At first I thought I had misplaced them. Then I remembered Jessica had borrowed my spare keys for emergencies. When I confronted David, he frowned. Mom, don't start imagining things. Jessica would never take your stuff. I didn't say she did. I'm saying they're missing. Maybe you're just forgetting. Forgetting. The word sliced through me like glass. I had spent decades proving to this world that black women could be sharp, capable, unbreakable, and now my own son was suggesting I was slipping. I forced a laugh. If I ever forget where I put my patience, I'll let you know. He didn't smile. Weeks passed. Jessica's tone grew bolder. At dinner one night, she looked around my home and said, You know, Evelyn, this place could really use a fresh touch. We could help you downsize. Downsize? Just a thought. Sometimes holding on to too much can be unhealthy. David nodded gently. She's just saying you deserve to relax, Mom. Don't worry about maintenance or bills. Maintenance. Bills. The house was paid off. I managed my accounts myself. but somehow they made it sound like I was barely functioning. Jessica smiled, twisting her engagement ring. "We love you and want what's best for you." I looked at her, then really looked. Her eyes didn't hold love, they held a calculation. That night, I walked through my empty hallway, touching the photos on the wall. Robert is holding baby David at the beach. Our first home, my parents' wedding day. They were all ghosts, now silent witnesses to a betrayal I could not yet prove but deeply felt. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window. Outside, the night hummed softly, as if waiting for me to make a decision. My phone buzzed a text from Jessica. "David said you seem tired lately. Can you schedule a checkup? Stress can really affect memory at your age. At your age." I typed a reply, then deleted it. No, not yet. This was no longer about age or property. It was about something much deeper power. She was testing how far she could push before I broke. She didn't know that I'd spent my entire life being underestimated. You can't manipulate a woman who's already survived life's worst storms. I closed my phone and whispered into the dark. "You chose the wrong mother-in-law, sweetheart." The first time David raised his voice to me, it wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to split something open inside me. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind of golden day that used to mean laughter, coffee, and easy conversation between us. Sundays had been ours for years, our small tradition since Robert's death. He'd visit after church, help me trim the rose bushes, and sometimes cook dinner while music played softly in the background. But that afternoon, he arrived later than usual. No hug, no flowers, just exhaustion in his eyes and tension in his shoulders. Jessica stayed in the car. He said I won't stay long, pacing my kitchen like a guest who couldn't wait to leave. "She's waiting outside." "She could come in," I offered gently. "I made peach cobbler." "She's allergic to peaches," he said quickly, avoiding my eyes. "Is Jessica allergic to peaches?" I almost laughed. I'd seen her eat peach sorbet at my own table weeks ago. But I swallowed my words. Instead, I said softly, "I don't bite David. She doesn't have to be afraid of me." His shoulders stiffened. "Mom, she's not afraid of you. But you must understand she feels you disapprove of her." I wiped my hands on a towel, steadying my breath. "Do I have to approve of the person who's rewriting my life?" "Rewriting." He frowned. "She's just trying to help." "Help," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "Is that what you call moving into a property she doesn't own and selling furniture she didn't buy?" His jaw tightened. "You're making too much of this. It was just a table, Mom. That table was your father's." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're being emotional again. Emotionally again." That was the moment something inside me hardened, because emotion is what people say when they want to silence a woman's truth. "David," I said quietly, "I've been emotional, rational, patient, and silent. It may be time you asked yourself why I'm all those things simultaneously." He didn't answer. He just shook his head and muttered, "Jessica thinks you need rest. Take a little trip. Clear your head." A trip. Or a convenient absence. "Rest sounds lovely," I said, smiling thinly. "Tell Jessica I'll rest once I've handled a few things." He nodded, relief washing over him like a man who'd avoided a storm. "Good, that's good." But what he didn't know was the storm had already started. The following week, the first late mortgage notice arrived in my mailbox. For the Maple Street house. It was addressed to me, of course, because my name, not David's, not Jessica's, was on the deed. When I called the bank, they confirmed 2 payments had been missed. I sat in my study, staring at the paper and feeling the air grow heavy. My son hadn't said a word. When I called him, he answered on the 3rd ring. "Mom, can we talk later? I'm with a client. This is about the house, David." A pause. "What house, Maple Street?" Another pause. Then a long breath. "I was going to tell you. We've been tight on money since Jessica's business launch. Things are picking up soon, though." "Jessica's business launch," I repeated, "and that's more important than paying your mortgage." "It's temporary. Please don't make this bigger than it is." "I'm not making it bigger. I'm reminding you of responsibility." His tone cooled. "Jessica says you like control." "And Jessica," I replied calmly, Likes things that belong to other people. He hung up. The click of that call ending felt like a knife sliding between ribs. 2 days later, Jessica came to see me. She arrived in a white blazer carrying a box of macarons and that same dazzling smile. "Evelyn," she chirped, "I hope I'm not intruding." "Oh, of course not," I lied, gesturing for her to sit. She placed the box on the counter, taking in my kitchen, like she was already redecorating it in her mind. "I wanted to apologize," she began. "David's been stressed. He might have snapped at you." "Snapped," I said softly. He hung up on me. Her expression was the picture of sympathy. "He's overwhelmed, trying to balance work, the mortgage, the wedding planning, you know how men are." "Yes," I said, "I had one for 30 years. He never forgot to pay a bill." Jessica's smile flickered just for a second. Then she recovered. "Robert sounds like he was terrific." "He was. I want to help David be his best self. You know, guide him." "I already raised him," I said. "He doesn't need another mother." Her smile tightened sharp as glass. "Sometimes letting go is the kindest thing a mother can do." I leaned forward slightly. "And sometimes pretending to care is the cruelest." The air between us grew still. She stood after a moment, brushing invisible dust off her sleeve. "I can see where David gets his temper." I smiled. He didn't get it from me. I learned restraint. She left without another word. And when the door shut, the silence was so thick it felt like the whole house was listening. That night, I took out the old family photo albums, not because I wanted nostalgia, but because I needed to remember who I was before them. The young Evelyn stood beside Robert at the ribbon-cutting ceremony of our first real estate office, the pride in his eyes. The determination is mine. We'd started with nothing. No investors, no inheritance, just grit. And now all that work had turned into a life my son didn't understand, a life his wife was already dismantling piece by piece. I stayed up late, my pen scratching against paper as I made lists, bank accounts, assets, debts, property values, the practical things. When emotion fails, organization saves. By dawn, I'd decided. If Jessica and David wanted to play house with my generosity, I would take the house and the game away from them both. That Friday, David appeared at my door again. He looked tired, guilty. "Mom," he said quietly, "Jessica told me what happened. You two shouldn't be fighting." "We didn't fight," I said, pouring coffee. "We exchanged philosophies." He frowned, sitting down. "She's worried about you." "How considerate." He sighed. "She said you've been acting paranoid." "Checking on us, calling the bank paranoid?" I echoed. "Is that what she calls accountability?" His hands clenched around his mug. "Mom, please." "I'm trying to keep the peace." "Then keep it by paying your bills. She said you threatened her." I stared at him. "Did she tell you what she said to me?" "That's not the point." "It's precisely the point." His voice rose. "You're twisting things. She's not your enemy." "No," I said softly. "She's worse. She's a mirror. And you can't stand seeing what she's showing you." He froze. For the first time, I saw fear not of me, but of losing the illusion he'd built. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. "You're being cruel." "Cruel," I whispered. "Cruel is watching your child walk toward a cliff and being told not to shout." He left without saying goodbye. His car engine fading down the street was the loneliest noise I'd ever heard. That weekend I drove to Monterey alone. The beach was gray and still, the waves heavy like memory itself. I unlocked the beach house door, walked inside, and felt the air shift, the scent of old wood ocean salt and the faint trace of Robert's cologne on the coat that still hung by the door. I sank into the sofa and closed my eyes. Once this place was laughter and burnt marshmallows, late-night talks, and morning sunlight through gauzy curtains. Now it was my sanctuary and my last piece of power. As I looked around, I realized something quietly liberating. Everything Jessica wanted from me was something I had built myself. And everything she hated, my independence, my control, my will, was what she could never replicate. She could copy my furniture, my charm, my son's affection. But she could never be me, because she had never lost everything and survived. I took out my phone, opened the contacts, and found Thomas Hartwell. When he answered, I said, "Thomas, it's time. Start the sale process. Both houses." He hesitated. Both, even the beach house, especially the beach house. As I watched the tide crawl across the sand that night, I thought of David's face, pale with confusion, and love twisted into loyalty. He would hate me. For a while. Maybe forever. But I would rather be hated for protecting what was right than loved for pretending not to see the wrong. The waves crashed steady and cold. Each one felt like a small truth breaking against the shore. And as dawn began to light the horizon, I whispered to myself, "They think they're taking everything from me, but they've only freed me to act." In the morning, I decided to sell everything. The sky was a steel color. It wasn't raining, but the air carried the taste of a storm, heavy, expectant, like the moment before thunder breaks. I woke early, long before sunrise, and sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee. The house was silent, except for the ticking clock above the stove. I just sat there for a long time, watching the steam twist and fade. It's strange how loss doesn't happen all at once. Sometimes it's a slow unraveling, one minor betrayal after another, until the person you love becomes someone you can't recognize. I had spent my life holding things together, a business, a marriage, a family, but that morning I realized that holding on had become the thing tearing me apart. Letting go wasn't a weakness. It was survival. By 8, I was sitting in Thomas Hartwell's office. He looked up from his desk, startled to see me. "Evelyn," he said, rising, "I didn't expect you this early." I replied that I didn't expect my life to turn into a soap opera, lowering myself into the chair opposite him. He smiled faintly the way people do when they want to comfort you but know better than to try. I handed him the folder, property deeds account summaries, notarized letters. I had spent the entire night preparing them. "I want both properties listed immediately," I said. "Quick sale. Private buyers preferred." He scanned the documents, then met my gaze. "You're sure, more sure than I've been about anything in years. Even the beach house. Especially the beach house." Thomas leaned back, studying me. "You know what this means, right? David will find out." "I know. He may never forgive you. He'll have to learn." He sighed, closing the folder gently. "You're not doing this out of anger, are you?" "No," I said softly. "I'm doing it out of clarity." As I left the law office, the sun had climbed higher, turning the glass buildings of downtown Charleston into mirrors. My reflection followed me from window to window, a woman with silver hair, dark skin, and calm eyes. Not a victim, not yet a villain, just someone who has been pretending to be loved. On the way home, I stopped at a florist, the same shop where Robert used to buy me lilies every anniversary. The owner, Mrs. Dale, still recognized me. "Lilies again?" she asked warmly. "Actually, no," I said. "Something that lasts longer." She smiled, handing me a pot of succulents. "Hard to kill, easy to love." "Perfect," I said. When I placed them on my kitchen windowsill later that afternoon, I realized how symbolic they were, plants that survive with little water roots that don't ask for much. Quiet endurance. Maybe that was me now. That evening, David called. His voice was cautious and polite, the tone you use with a stranger you don't want to offend. "Mom, Jessica told me you've been selling some things." "Yes," I said, "decluttering. Both houses." "Yes?" Silence stretched so long I could hear his breath catching. "Why?" he finally whispered. "Because I'm tired of being the only one paying for everyone else's peace of mind." "Mom, you can't just—" I interrupted, my tone calm but firm. "They're in my name. I'm within my rights." He exhaled sharply. "Jessica says Jessica." I said, cutting him off again, "Must remember she married my son, not my estate." "Mom." "David, I'm done arguing. You'll get your share one day. But for now, I'm choosing myself." He didn't yell. He didn't plead. He just said quietly, "You've changed." "No." I said. I finally stopped apologizing. The next few weeks moved fast. Thomas found buyers for both houses, a retired couple from Savannah, the other a family looking for a summer home by the coast. I accepted both offers without hesitation. Jessica must have found out almost immediately because 3 days later, she showed up on my doorstep. She didn't knock. She rang the bell once, then barged in when I opened the door. Her perfect hair was slightly frizzed, her eyes cold. "You sold the house," she hissed. "Which one?" I asked. "Please don't play games with me, Evelyn. The one we live in." "Oh, that one," I said, mildly. "Yes. The new owners take possession next month." "You can't do that. I just did." Her face flushed red. "You're ruining David's life." "No, I said you are. I'm just cleaning up the damage." She took a step forward, her voice trembling with fury. "You're a bitter, lonely woman who can't stand to see her son happy." "Happy," I said softly. "Is that what you call debt deceit and dependence?" Her eyes flickered just for a second, then her lips curled into that smile I'd come to despise. "You know," she said, "people talk. They say you're not, well, that you forget things and make rash decisions. People, or you? Same difference." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "If you're trying to make me look unstable, Jessica, you must try harder. I've survived boardrooms full of men who thought they could outsmart me. You're not even close." She stared at me, measuring something. Then she smirked. "You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming?" I smiled faintly. "Then surprise me." She turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her so hard that one of my picture frames fell to the floor. When I bent to pick it up, the glass had cracked straight through Robert's smile. I didn't cry. I just whispered, "It's time." Over the next few days, I closed accounts, transferred funds, and moved everything to a new bank. My lawyer handled the legal paperwork. At night, I walked through the empty rooms, the echo of my footsteps strange and hollow. I touched the walls one last time, remembering the years of laughter arguments and quiet forgiveness that had lived here. Letting hurts. It always does. But sometimes love becomes a kind of cage, and freedom, even painful freedom, is still freedom. The morning before the final signing, I drove to the beach house one last time. The ocean was calm, unusually still, as if it too was holding its breath. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and inhaled the salt wood and sunlight that still clung to the place. It was precisely as Robert had left it, books still on the shelves, a faint scent of cedar in the air. I walked through each room, slowly touching the furniture, tracing the grain of the dining table he'd built. Then, in the living room corner, I found the old surfboard David had used as a child, faded blue chipped at the edges. I ran my hand along it and felt something warm rise in my chest. Not anger, not regret, but the quiet ache of motherhood, the knowledge that love doesn't end just because respect does. You can forgive someone and still never trust them again. Before leaving, I took a small envelope from my purse and slid it under the couch cushion, a letter addressed to David. Inside were 2 sentences. "When you remember who you are, you'll find me again. Until then, I'm done waiting." I locked the door, slipped the key into my pocket, and walked toward the shore. The water was cold when I stepped in, but it grounded me. Above the horizon stretched endlessly a line between what was and what would never be again. I whispered to the wind, "Goodbye, Robert." I kept my promise. I raised him the best I could, and for the first time in months I felt lighter. Not happy, but free. When the papers were signed and the sales became official, I thought I would feel relief. Instead, silence clung to me like fog filling every corner of the house. Freedom isn't loud. It's quiet. Sometimes painfully quiet. For the first time in 40 years, there were no properties to manage, no tenants to call, no bills waiting in neat piles on the desk. I had turned a lifetime of work into a single check sitting in an envelope at the bottom of my purse. It should have felt like victory. But victory always leaves a hollow echo when it comes at the cost of love. David found out 2 days later. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was folding laundry when the sound of tires screeching outside made me freeze. Moments later, the front door burst open. "Mom." His voice was thunder raw, trembling with disbelief. He stood in the doorway, his shirt wrinkled, his hair unkempt, holding a crumpled letter. "You sold everything." I set the laundry aside, keeping my tone calm. "Yes, it's done. Done." He laughed bitterly. "The house, the beach house, you didn't even tell me?" "I didn't need to." He took a step forward. "You didn't need to." "You erased our family history without asking David," I said softly. "Our family history isn't inside walls and roofs. It's inside people. The problem is, you've been treating me like a building to own, not a mother to love." He looked at me as if I'd struck him. "That's not fair," he said. "Neither was watching you forget who raised you." He dropped the paper, running a hand through his hair. "You think this fixes anything?" Jessica's devastated. "She says you're doing this to punish us." "Jessica," I repeated quietly, "has mistaken consequences for punishment. She's scared, Mom. She thinks you're crazy." I finished for him. He froze. The word hung in the air between us, sharp and heavy. His silence was confirmation enough. I smiled sadly. "Of course she does. Mom." "No," I said, cutting him off. "You can believe whatever you want. But I won't be the villain in the story she's writing for you." He exhaled shakily, his voice cracking. "You've changed." I looked him straight in the eyes. "No, David." I stopped waiting for permission to protect myself. He didn't reply. He just stared at me, torn between guilt and loyalty, between love and the lies that had cocooned him. Then he turned and left. The door slamming echoed through the house like a final punctuation mark at the end of a long, painful sentence. That night, the loneliness came. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It came quietly, the way waves return after a storm, soft but relentless. I sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker across the wet pavement. My hands trembled not from fear, but from the weight of what I'd done. Freedom always cost something. I just hadn't expected it to cost him. The next morning, Jessica called. Her voice was sugar-coated venom. "Evelyn," she said, "you've made quite a mess. I do that when I clean up other people's chaos." She laughed, a brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. "You really think this ends with you selling a few properties? You've humiliated David. Everyone's talking about how unstable you are." "I'm sure they are," I said. "It must be exhausting to keep up appearances. I'm not the one losing my mind." "Not yet," I said. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. Then her voice dropped lower. "You think you're clever, but you've underestimated me. You've taken what's his, what's ours, and I'm not letting that slide." "Then don't," I said, and hung up. By noon, I noticed a car parked across the street, a dark sedan with tinted windows. It stayed there for hours. The car drove away when I finally walked outside to check the mail. Coincidence. But my gut told me Jessica had started whatever game she'd been threatening. That night, I checked the locks twice. 2 days later, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from Serenity Springs Mental Health Facility. The words swam on the page as I read, "We have received preliminary inquiries regarding an evaluation request under the Elder Mental Competence Act." My hands went cold. Jessica wasn't bluffing. The following week was a blur of whispered phone calls and unexpected visitors. A woman claiming to be a social services representative checked my well-being. She smiled too widely, her clipboard already filled. "Just routine," she said. "We received a report that you might be struggling to manage your affairs." I stared at her until she shifted uncomfortably. "My affairs are fine," I said. "You can leave." She hesitated. "You're sure you don't want to talk?" "I'm sure," I said, closing the door slowly but firmly in her face. As the latch clicked, I realized Jessica wasn't just after property anymore. She wanted control. Legal, documented, irreversible control. That evening, I called Thomas. He listened in silence as I explained. "She's trying to build a case," I said, "to have me declared incompetent." He exhaled. "It's not uncommon, unfortunately, but she'll need proof testimony, medical documentation, behavioral patterns." "She's planting them," I said. "Every word, every whisper, every visitor. She's setting the stage." "Then we get ahead of it," he replied. "We prepare a record. I'll document everything. Calls, letters, visits. If this goes to court, we'll show the pattern." "Thank you," I whispered. He paused. "Evelyn, are you safe?" I thought of the car outside, the false smiles, the son who no longer trusted me. "I'm standing," I said. "That's enough for now." That weekend, I drove to the coast again. It was gone not to the beach house, but to the cliffs above it where the view stretched endlessly over the gray Atlantic. The sea was wild that day, the wind sharp against my skin. I stood there, long coat-billowing hair whipping around my face, the horizon blurred between ocean and sky, endless and uncertain like everything ahead of me. I whispered to the wind, "If they want a war, I'll give them one." But even as I said it, my heart ached, because I didn't want war. I wanted peace, the kind I used to find in David's laughter and Robert's hand holding mine. And yet peace doesn't come to those who stay silent. It comes to those willing to lose everything, rather than be erased. As I drove home that night, I saw the dark sedan again parked one street over. This time it didn't move when I slowed down. A figure sat in the driver's seat phone, glowing faintly in the dark. I took out my phone, pretended to call someone, and drove past without looking again. Back home, I called Thomas once more. "Thomas, find out who's behind Serenity Springs inquiry, and I want you to start a file, copies of every document. I don't trust electronic records anymore." "I'll handle it," he said. "Evelyn, be careful." "I always am," I replied, though my voice trembled. When I hung up, I sat alone in the dark living room, the sound of my own breathing louder than the ticking clock. Slowly, I began writing in my notebook, the same one Robert used to keep financial notes in. Every conversation, every visit, every strange occurrence. If Jessica wanted a war of evidence, I'd give her one. On paper. In ink. Unshakable. I titled the first page, "The Things They Think I'll Forget." The following weeks blurred together like one long twilight, neither peace nor chaos. Just that uneasy quiet before something breaks. Every day I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing. Sometimes it was David. Sometimes it was silence, a number that hung up when I answered. I stopped keeping count. People I barely knew began stopping me at the grocery store, smiling too sweetly, asking how I was feeling. The pharmacist offered to help me manage my medication schedule, though I hadn't taken anything more substantial than calcium in years. Jessica was spreading her story, softly, subtly, the way poison works best. It started small whispers that I'd been forgetful, that I'd been acting out of character. Then came the sideways glances, the gentle pity. Even my church group changed. The women who used to chat with me after service began avoiding eye contact, as if my sanity might be contagious. I wanted to scream, but screaming would have only confirmed what Jessica wanted them to believe, so I smiled instead, and watched. One afternoon I found a letter slipped under my front door. No envelope, just a single sheet of paper with neat handwriting. "Sometimes people can't see when they need help. We're only doing what's best for you." No signature. The next morning, the same car returned, parked across the street, again engine idling. The world was shrinking around me inch by inch until even my neighborhood felt like an unfamiliar stage. I started documenting everything in the notebook: license plate numbers, dates, overheard conversations, and times Jessica called. Each entry became an act of defiance, because when they try to make you doubt your memory, the written word becomes your weapon. David called again the following week. His voice was tired, uncertain. "Mom," he began, "Jessica's worried about you." "Of course she is," I said, my voice dry. "It's easier to call me crazy than to admit she's wrong." He sighed. "You can't keep accusing her of things. It's not healthy." "Healthy?" I echoed. "Tell me, David, how healthy is it for a mother to be stalked by her daughter-in-law?" "That's not what's happening." "Then what is?" "Because I'm seeing cars, letters, and strangers asking if I take my meds." He hesitated. "Maybe they're just concerned. Concerned people knock on doors. They don't whisper." The silence that followed was worse than anger. It was disbelief, the sound of a son choosing someone else's truth over his mother's. "David?" I said softly, "How much of me do you have to lose before you start asking questions?" He didn't answer. Later that night, the power went out. Not a citywide blackout, just my house. The lights flickered once, twice, then everything went dark. I stood in the living room, listening to the hum fade into silence. For a moment I thought it was a coincidence. Then I saw it, a faint glow from the backyard. A phone screen. Someone was outside. My heart pounded. I crept to the window, but the light had vanished when I pulled back the curtain. When I stepped outside moments later, the air smelled faintly of perfume. Her perfume. The next morning, I found muddy footprints near the side door. Not from me, they were smaller, lighter. Jessica wanted me afraid. But fear wasn't the weapon she thought it was. It was fuel. By noon, I was sitting in Thomas's office again. He looked alarmed as soon as I walked in. "Evelyn, what happened?" "She's escalating," I said. "And I'm done reacting. It's time we take this to the next level." Thomas leaned forward. "Do you want to file a restraining order? No. That's too obvious. It'll only feed her story that I'm paranoid. Then what do you want to do?" "I want evidence," I said. "Real evidence. She's been clever but not careful." He nodded slowly. "You're thinking surveillance? I'm thinking insurance," I said. "Install cameras, hidden ones. I'll have proof if she steps 1 foot near my property again." Thomas hesitated. "Evelyn, this could become dangerous." "It already is," I said. "That weekend I hired a security company. A young technician came by, polite, discreet. He installed 4 small cameras, barely visible, one near the porch, one by the back fence, another inside the hallway, and one hidden behind the curtain in the living room. When he was done, he handed me the Access app. "Everything's backed up to a secure cloud," he explained. "Motion alerts come straight to your phone." "Perfect," I said. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. 3 days later, the motion alert went off. It was 2:43 a.m. I sat up heart-hammering, grabbed my phone, and opened the feed. The porch camera showed movement, a figure standing just outside the frame of the light. The person didn't knock, didn't move, just stood there for almost a minute. Then a hand reached out, pressed something against the door, and left. I waited until dawn before opening it. Taped to the door was a photo. Of me. Taken from inside my house. I didn't panic. I wanted to, but panic is what they wanted. Instead, I made coffee, sat and stared at the photo. My reflection stared back, frozen mid-step in my own hallway. Jessica was getting bold. I called Thomas first, then the police. The officer who arrived was young, polite, and skeptical. "Do you know who might have done this, ma'am?" I smiled faintly. "I have a list." He frowned. "Do you have proof I will?" He took the photo, promised to file a report, and left. I didn't believe I'd hear back. But I didn't need their protection. I needed their paperwork. Official records, timestamps, signatures, police reports. The kind of paper trail Jessica couldn't twist. 2 days later, Thomas called back. "Evelyn, I looked into Serenity Springs. Someone filed an inquiry under your name but didn't come from a medical provider. It came from a private email domain, not even a law firm. Can you trace it?" "Already did. It's connected to a company Jessica registered with 2 months ago, a wellness consulting business." I laughed short, bitter. "So she's diagnosing me now?" "She's building her foundation," he said. "But now we can prove intent. Keep your recordings, your logs. If she's reckless enough to come near you again, she'll expose herself." "Oh, I said she will." As I sat by the window that night, I caught my reflection in the glass, tired eyes, steady hands, and something fierce behind them, the kind of quiet strength born from decades of survival. Robert used to call it my boardroom face, the look I wore when people underestimated me. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed it. 3 nights later, the cameras caught her. 2:17 a.m. Jessica's white SUV pulled up to the curb. She stepped out barefoot, wearing a long coat over silk pajamas. She looked around, then walked toward my mailbox. I watched on the feed as she opened it, slipped an envelope inside, and returned to her car. I zoomed in. Her face was clear under the porch light. She paused just once and looked directly at the camera. Then she smiled, as if she knew, as if she was daring me to act. I didn't move. I didn't call anyone. I just whispered to the empty room, "Got you." The morning after Jessica's midnight visit, the world felt heavier, as if even the air had learned to hold its breath. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope she'd left in front of me. For a long time, I didn't touch it. The paper seemed to hum with threat, like a live wire. Finally, I opened it. Inside were printed pages, copies of medical reports I'd never seen, each stamped confidential. My name was typed neatly across the top. The words beneath were surreal. The subject exhibits signs of cognitive decline, increasing paranoia, exhibits erratic behavior. Attached was a fake signature, a doctor I'd never met. Jessica wasn't just playing mind games anymore, she was rewriting my identity on paper. I called Thomas immediately. When he picked up, my voice was shaking. "She's forged medical records." He exhaled sharply. "Evelyn, slow down. What exactly did she send?" I read the report to him line by line. He went silent. Then, finally, "This is serious. If she's building false documentation, she's preparing to file for guardianship." I gripped the edge of the table. "You mean legal control?" "Yes. Financial, medical, everything. She's trying to have you declared incompetent." The room tilted slightly. The refrigerator hummed like distant thunder. For a moment, I could only think of David's face, tired, confused, and trusting her. "She'll make him sign," I whispered. "She'll make him believe she's saving me." Thomas's voice softened. "Then we have to move faster. I'll contact a private investigator who can verify her actions without alerting her. And Evelyn, don't be alone with them. Not even David." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "I'm past being afraid," I said quietly. "Now I'm angry." 2 days later, I got the call I'd been expecting. It was David. His voice was thin, formal, the kind you use when rehearsing someone else's lines. "Mom, Jessica and I need to meet with you. It's important. Is she there now?" "Yes." "Then no," I said. He hesitated. "It's about your well-being. My well-being doesn't require your supervision. Mom, please. This is serious. We're coming over." The line went dead before I could refuse again. They arrived an hour later. Jessica walked in first, her perfumed smile soft-spoken poison. David followed, eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't slept. She held a folder. "Evelyn, we're worried about you." I leaned back in my chair. "How thoughtful." David swallowed hard. "Mom, please don't make this more complicated." Harder than what Jessica placed the folder on the table and slid it toward me. "These are your evaluation results." The doctor confirmed what we feared, early-onset memory issues. I looked down at the papers, the same ones from the envelope. "Doctor," I said slowly, "is this the same man whose name you forged?" Jessica's expression didn't flicker. "I don't know what you mean." David looked from her to me, confusion clouding his face. "Mom," he said. Jessica spoke with the clinic herself. They confirmed David. I interrupted. "When did you last talk with this so-called doctor yourself?" He hesitated. Jessica handled it. Of course she did. I stood pushing the chair back quietly. "Get out. Mom, out." Jessica rose too, her voice calm, almost pitying. "Evelyn, we'll have to involve the authorities if you refuse help." I smiled, slow and deliberate. "Good. Please do." The confidence in her eyes flickered for the first time. David looked lost. "Mom, don't do this." "I already did," I said. "Now both of you leave my home." They hesitated, then turned and walked out. Through the window, I watched Jessica slip her hand into his, whispering something that made his shoulders sag. For a long time after they drove away, I stood at the window, my pulse steady, my resolve sharper than ever. If she wanted a war built on paper, I'd drown her in evidence. That evening, I met with the private investigator Thomas had hired. Angela Hart, a retired detective with calm gray eyes and a voice with quiet authority. She listened without interrupting as I laid out everything, the fake reports, the photographs, the visits. When I finished, she said, "You've been patient too long." I almost laughed. Patience is the only armor a woman my age is allowed to wear. She smiled faintly. "Then it's time to trade armor for weapons." Angela installed a small recorder under my dining table, another behind the entryway clock, and gave me a slim pen that doubled as an audio device. She said, "If they try to push you again, let them talk. They'll give us everything we need." For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to hope. The next visit came sooner than I expected. 3 nights later, Jessica called, her voice dripping false kindness. "Evelyn, we've arranged something extraordinary, a consultation with a specialist. He can help you understand what's happening." "What's happening?" I said. is that you're about to make the biggest mistake of your life." She laughed softly. "Oh, Evelyn, you sound just like my last client before she was admitted." The line clicked dead. They arrived the next morning, Jessica, David, and two strangers. One wore a white coat, the other carried a clipboard. Mrs. Walker, the man in the coat, said, "I'm Dr. Franklin. We're here for a brief wellness assessment." I looked past him to Jessica. "How interesting. I didn't make an appointment." "It's voluntary," Jessica said quickly, but refusing could raise red flags for adult services. Angela's recorder pen was already in my pocket. "Then, by all means," I said, "assess away." The so-called doctor began asking questions, my name, the date, and where I lived. I answered each one clearly, deliberately, looking him straight in the eye. He scribbled notes. "Have you experienced confusion recently?" "Yes," I said, "usually when people I trust try to gaslight me." Jessica flinched. David's jaw tightened. Dr. Franklin cleared his throat. "Do you ever forget essential details only when they're irrelevant?" He hesitated. Like the names of liars pretending to be doctors." David stepped forward. "Mom, stop." "No," I said. "You stop." My tone was quiet, but sharp enough to cut glass. "You brought strangers into my home, David. You stood by while she falsified documents. Do you even hear yourself anymore?" His face crumpled. "I'm just trying to help. Then help me by opening your eyes." Jessica's voice sliced through the tension. "Enough! Dr. Franklin, note her aggression." I laughed low and bitter. "Aggression? No, dear. That's clarity." Dr. Franklin shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should reschedule." But Jessica was already pulling him toward the door. "We'll return with proper authorization." "Please do," I said. "And bring real credentials next time." I let out a long, shaking breath when the door closed behind them. Then I turned to Angela's hidden recorder under the table. "Did you get that?" I whispered. A faint light blinked twice, confirmation. "Good." The next day, Thomas called with news. "Angela sent me the audio," he said. "It's solid. Between that and the forged documents, we have enough to press criminal charges: fraud, falsification, coercion." I leaned back, exhaling slowly. "And David?" "He's listed as a secondary participant, but it's clear from the recording that he's being manipulated. The district attorney will see that." I nodded. He'll have to face what he's done, but he deserves the chance to understand it. That night, I sat alone on the porch, the sky heavy with rain clouds. Lightning flashed in the distance, painting the neighborhood silver for an instant. I thought of Robert again, his steady voice, his faith in the truth. He'd once told me, "Integrity isn't what you say when you're safe. It's what you whisper when no one believes you." I whispered to the storm, "You'd be proud, Robert." I didn't fold. The first drops of rain hit the porch railing. Inside, my phone buzzed a message from an unknown number. "You think you've won. You haven't even seen the end. No signature." But I didn't need one. Jessica was cornered, and cornered people are dangerous. I closed the phone, steadying my breath. I wasn't done being afraid, but I was done being silent. The morning the police came, the rain hadn't stopped since dawn. I watched from the living room window as two patrol cars pulled up across the street. The flashing blue lights painted the wet pavement in waves of sorrow and relief. Thomas had warned me the night before. "They'll serve the warrant at her house first," he'd said. "Then they'll come here for your statement. Be ready." I had spent the night pacing. Even victory felt heavy when it came wrapped in betrayal. When the knock finally came, it was gentle, as if the officers already knew the story wasn't one of violence, but of cruelty. "Mrs. Walker." "Yes." "I'm Detective Morales. You must visit the station later to verify the recordings and statements. Miss Jessica Brown was taken into custody this morning." I nodded once. "On what charges? Fraud, document forgery, and attempted coercion of an elder." The words sounded clinical cold, but they burned with justice to me. After they left, I sat alone listening to the rain tapping against the window pane. It was strange. I had imagined this moment so many times, but now that it was real, there was no triumph. Just quiet. I made tea, held the cup between my hands, and stared at the steam curling upward, like smoke from a fire finally dying out. The phone rang. It was David. For a long time, I didn't answer. My fingers hovered above the screen, trembling between anger and longing. Finally, I picked up. "Mom," he said softly, voice thick with shame. "They arrested her." "I know, I didn't see it, Mom. I swear I didn't. She told me I know what she told you," I said. "I thought I was protecting you." I closed my eyes. "And instead, you protected her." The silence that followed was the longest we'd ever shared. "I don't expect forgiveness," he whispered. "Good," I said gently, "because forgiveness isn't something you expect, it's something you rebuild." He sobbed quietly on the other end. I let him. I didn't try to comfort him for the first time in months. Some lessons needed to hurt. When he finally spoke again, his voice was broken but honest. "I want to make it right. Then start by facing what you ignored." "I will." And for the first time, I believed him. 2 weeks passed before I saw him again. He came to the house unannounced, holding a box of old photographs. His eyes were tired, but clearer, like the fog had finally lifted. "I found these," he said, "from the lake trip." "You remember?" I smiled faintly. "How could I forget you tried to fish with a breadstick?" He laughed, embarrassed. "I was 6. I took the photos from him. My fingers brushed his the slightest touch that felt like reopening a locked door. We sat together on the couch, flipping through pictures of summers long gone. In one, Robert held David on his shoulders, laughing at something out of frame. In another, I was standing by the grill apron, crooked hair wild from the wind. "Mom," David said quietly, "I see now how blind I was. Love makes fools of us all," I said. "It just hits harder when it's your own blood." He looked at me, eyes wet. "You don't deserve what she did." "Neither did you," I replied. He shook his head. "But you endured it better." "No," I said softly. "I just learned earlier that survival isn't about strength. It's about still choosing decency when no one returns it." A week later, the trial began. Jessica sat at the defense table in a gray suit, her hair ideally brushed, her smile gone. The courtroom smelled faintly of disinfectant and tension. The room went utterly silent when they played Angela's recording from the doctor's visit. Her voice, calm and venomous, filled the speakers. "If she refuses, we'll escalate. I can make her look unstable within a week." The prosecutor paused the tape. "Mrs. Walker," he said, "is this the woman who attempted to have you declared incompetent?" "Yes." "Did she forge your medical documents?" "Yes." Jessica avoided my gaze, staring down at her manicured hands. David sat behind me in the courtroom, his head bowed. When it was over, the judge's verdict came swiftly and coldly, guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 5 years in state prison. 5 years. Enough time for me to live freely again. That night I returned home alone. The house felt different, not emptier, just lighter. I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped onto the porch. The air was cool, the scent of wet earth rising after days of rain. I could hear distant laughter from neighbors' children splashing in puddles. Life, indifferent and beautiful, kept moving forward. I thought of the beach house that had started it all. It was gone, sold to strangers, its walls no longer mine. And yet I didn't feel loss anymore, because I realized the house was never the legacy. I was. Every sacrifice, tear, and quiet act of resistance was the brick of something more substantial than any building. A few days later, a letter arrived from Angela. Inside was a candid photo she'd taken without me noticing the day the police came. I was standing by the window, hands folded, rain behind me. On the back of the photo she'd written, "You didn't just survive, Evelyn. You reclaimed yourself." I smiled. For the first time in years, I felt that word myself and believed it. Months passed. David started visiting every Sunday, bringing groceries and stories from work. Sometimes he stayed for dinner. Sometimes we just sat silently watching the sunset bleed over the street. There was no need to talk about Jessica. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore, it was peace. One evening, as he was leaving, he turned at the door. "Mom." "Yes." "Do you ever wish things had been different?" I thought for a long moment. No, I said finally. I wish I had been different sooner. But life has its timing. We only wake up when the pain gets loud enough. He nodded, understanding more than words could say. That night, I opened my notebook, the one I'd started months ago. The pages were filled with notes, dates, fears, and small victories. At the bottom of the last page, I wrote, "Freedom doesn't arrive with applause. It comes with silence when the world finally stops doubting you, and you no longer doubt yourself." Then I closed the book. Outside, the rain had stopped, and somewhere deep in my chest, so had the storm. The seasons changed quietly that year. Summer came without announcement, sunlight spilling through the lace curtains, the scent of magnolia drifting from the yard. It was the first summer in decades. I didn't feel the weight of obligation pressing on my chest. No tenants calling, no ledgers to balance, no one to prove myself to. Freedom, I learned, wasn't a celebration. It was the simple act of breathing without fear that someone might twist your truth again. But silence, even the peaceful kind, can be dangerous. It makes you listen to memories, regrets, and everything you once buried to survive. One morning, I stood before the old cedar chest Robert had built years ago. It sat in the corner of my bedroom untouched since he passed. The wood had darkened with time, but the carvings, small flowers along the edge, were still as gentle as the day his hands made them. I knelt, ran my fingers over the lid, and opened it. Inside were fragments of a life. A pressed flower from our wedding, a faded baby blanket, Robert's favorite fountain pen, a postcard from the beach house, and beneath it all, a small leather-bound journal. The first page was dated 1985. Robert's handwriting filled the lines, neat, deliberate, full of quiet faith. For Evelyn. So you'll remember even when I'm gone, we built something worth keeping. My throat tightened. I hadn't realized until that moment how much I'd stopped remembering him, not out of neglect but out of self-defense. Grief, when worn too long, becomes armor, and I'd mistaken armor for healing. That night I sat by the window and began to read. Page after page, Robert wrote about ordinary days, fixing the porch light, teaching David to ride a bike, planting roses. But between the lines, I saw something I had forgotten how much he had trusted me. He wrote not as a man who led, but as one who believed that I was his equal, his partner, his calm in every storm. I hadn't felt that kind of trust in years. By the time I reached the final page, the words blurred through my tears. If you ever find this, Evelyn, know this. Home isn't a place. It's someone who refuses to leave, even when everything else does. I closed the journal slowly, pressing it against my chest. Maybe that's what Jessica could never understand, that a woman's worth isn't measured by what she owns, but by what she remembers, survives, and rebuilds. The next morning I called the city office and asked about volunteering at the local community center. The woman on the phone sounded surprised. She said, "We mainly need people for mentoring programs, teens, single mothers, and seniors in transition." "I've transitioned enough for 3 lifetimes," I replied. "I'll do it." By September, I was spending 2 days a week there. At first, I just helped sort donations, canned food, winter coats, and other things people gave because it made them feel generous. But then I met Lydia, a 17-year-old girl with eyes too tired for her age. She'd stayed at the center since her mother's boyfriend kicked her out. The first time she spoke to me, her voice was sharp with suspicion. "You don't look like someone who gets it." I smiled. I don't. But I know what it's like to lose a home. That broke through her armor just a little. Over the next weeks, she followed me around like a shadow, helping with boxes, asking quiet questions. "Did you ever forgive him? The one who hurt you?" she asked once. I thought of David, of Jessica, of all the versions of myself that stayed silent too long. "No," I said, "but I forgave myself for letting it happen." She nodded slowly, as if turning the words over in her mind. One afternoon, Lydia found an old photo on my desk, the one Angela had taken of me standing by the rain-soaked window. "Is this you?" she asked. "It is. You look strong, like nothing could touch you." I smiled faintly. That's because everything was already there. She was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, I want to be like that one day. You will, I said, if you learn when to walk away and when not to. The center became my second home. Not because I needed to belong somewhere, but to give shape to all the strength I'd kept locked inside. Every woman I met there carried a story that echoed my own different details, same ache. The betrayal of trust, the long road back to believing in themselves. And in helping them, I realized something simple but profound. Healing isn't forgetting what broke you. It's learning how to live around it gracefully, deliberately, without bitterness. One evening in November, I returned home to find David waiting on the porch holding a small wooden frame. I made this, he said shyly, for your wall. Inside the frame was a photo, the three of us, Robert, me, and little David at the lake. Someone had written beneath it, before the world got complicated. I laughed softly. That's sweet. He looked down. I just wanted you to know I'm still trying. I touched his hand. That's all that matters. We didn't need to say more. Love once broken doesn't return the same, but sometimes it grows back differently, quietly sturdier. I lit a candle by Robert's photo on the mantel that night. The flame flickered gently, casting soft gold across the room. I whispered, you were right. Home isn't walls. It's the people who stay even when they almost don't. The wind outside carried the scent of autumn through the open window. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed low, steady, like the heartbeat of time itself. For the first time in years, I didn't need to look back. I existed here in this moment, finally safe inside the house I'd rebuilt within myself. Winter came softly that year. No storms, no drama, just slow mornings filled with the smell of coffee and the creak of the house as it settled against the cold. I had grown to love that sound, the quiet proof that things could endure without breaking. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the kitchen window, the silver in my hair gleaming under the pale light, and I'd think I've lived through enough to deserve peace. Peace, not the absence of noise, but the absence of needing to defend myself. David came over most weekends now. He'd stop by with groceries, fix the light bulbs without being asked, then linger on the porch like he used to when he was little, afraid to go home after curfew. This time, though, he wasn't afraid of punishment. He was scared of losing connection again. One evening, as he was screwing in a new light fixture, he said, Mom, you ever think about moving? Where would I go? I don't know. Closer to the coast. You always loved the ocean. I smiled faintly. The ocean's been good to me, but it's taken enough too. I'm fine here. He nodded. I don't want you to be alone. Alone isn't the same as lonely, I said. I've spent years surrounded by people who made me feel lonelier than silence ever could. He paused, then said softly, I get that now. In January, Lydia from the community center came to visit. She'd found a small apartment and was studying for her GED. She looked brighter, more alive, though the old wariness still flickered in her eyes. She said I wouldn't have made it without you setting a box of pastries on the table. Yes, you would have, I said. You just needed someone to remind you you could. She grinned. You sound like one of those motivational speakers. I'm too tired for inspiration. I prefer honesty. Lydia laughed, then looked at me seriously. You know you should write this stuff down. Everything you've lived through. People need stories like yours, stories like mine. Ones where women don't die from heartbreak. They rebuild from it. Her words stayed with me long after she left. I opened a new notebook that night, blank, clean, expectant. At the top of the first page, I wrote, It began with a house by the sea and ended with a woman who learned she was the foundation all along. Writing became my quiet ritual. Every morning after feeding the stray cat that had claimed my porch as home, I'd sit by the window and write for an hour. It was not for anyone to read, but putting my story into words made it really different. Pain, when spoken, loses its claws. Some days I wrote about Robert, the warmth in his eyes when he laughed, the way he used to tap his fingers on the steering wheel in rhythm to old Motown songs. Other days I wrote about David the child and man he was becoming. And sometimes I wrote about Jessica, not with hate, but with the strange pity you reserve for people who only know how to take. Because once you've lived long enough, you learn that villains aren't born. They're made by hunger for love control and validation, and I'd stopped feeding that hunger in anyone else but myself. Spring came early that year. The garden bloomed brighter than in years, tulips, hydrangeas, wild violets pushing through the soil like survivors. One afternoon, I found David kneeling beside the rose bushes, carefully trimming away the dead stems. "Who taught you that?" I asked. He smiled. "You did. I wasn't paying attention before." We worked side by side for a while and neither spoke. The sun felt soft against my face, the air filled with the smell of earth and renewal. Then he said quietly, "I got an offer, Mom. For work, yeah, in Portland. It's a promotion. Good pay, more responsibility." My heart squeezed, but I didn't show it. "That's wonderful. I don't want to leave you." "You won't," I said. "You'll live somewhere else. There's a difference." He looked at me, uncertain. "You're sure, David, if there's one thing I've learned, you don't build your life around guilt. You make it around growth." He exhaled relief, softening his face. "You always know what to say." "No," I said. "I just finally stopped saying what people wanted to hear." He hugged me for a long time at the front door the day he left. "I'll call every Sunday," he said. "I know." He hesitated. "Mom, do you still think about her, Jessica?" Sometimes, I admitted, but only as a reminder of who I don't want to become. Bitter, manipulative, afraid of being small. He nodded slowly. "She sent a letter from prison. Did you read it? Not yet. Then wait until you're ready. And if you never are, that's fine too." He slipped the envelope into his jacket pocket and kissed my forehead. Then he drove away. I stood on the porch until his car disappeared down the street, the sound of the engine fading into a kind of silence that felt less like loss and more like release. Weeks later, I received a letter from the publishing workshop Lydia had enrolled me in without telling me. The director wrote, "Your submission, The House by the Sea, has been selected for our mentorship program. Your voice could help others heal." I laughed out loud, startled, delighted, terrified. Me. A woman who once thought her words didn't matter enough to fight for. Now they mattered to someone else. I traveled to Portland to visit David and attend the writing program that summer. He picked me up at the train station, grinning like a boy again. "You look happy," he said. "I am. Are you nervous about sharing your story a little? But stories don't belong to the person who lived them. They belong to whoever needs them next." He smiled. "Then you're about to help a lot of people." The workshop took place in an old converted library. Sunlight spilled across wooden tables, dust floating in the air like memory. There were 10 of us women from different walks of life, all carrying stories too heavy to hold alone. When it was my turn to read, I opened to the first line I'd written months ago. It began with "a house by the sea." My voice trembled at first, then steadied. As I read, I realized this wasn't just about betrayal, revenge, or survival. It was about continuity, the quiet resilience that keeps women standing long after the world stops clapping. When I finished, there was no applause. Only silence, deep, respectful understanding. The kind of silence that means we've been there too. That evening, David took me to dinner by the waterfront. The air smelled of salt and wood smoke. We ate in comfortable quiet until he said, "You know, Mom, I think you finally got your beach house back." I looked at him, puzzled. "What do you mean? It's not the one you sold. It's the one inside you. The peace you built after everything." I laughed softly. "Maybe you're right." He raised his glass. "To start over." I raised mine. "To remember why we began." I sat by the hotel window that night, watching the waves roll against the pier. The moonlight scattered across the water, silver and endless, and I realized something beautiful. I didn't need revenge to close the story. I just needed to live long enough to rewrite the ending. The tide turned quiet, and I let it. Because some victories aren't loud. They're just steady like the heartbeat of a woman who finally came home to herself.